Okay, hello and welcome everybody. A collaborative startup grind chapter from the Seoul chapter, the Osaka chapter, and the Singapore chapter. And we have a lot of guests from all the other chapters as well today, so quite excited to have you all here. We've got a very exciting session for you all today, titled Winter is Coming for the Startup Scene. Let's overcome it by entering the Asian market. So we have 4 amazing startups with us today. We've got Theo from Intellect, Ian from Travel, Namun from What 3 Words, and Dr. Hong from Capio Biosciences. These are all startups who have done market entry within Asia. Some have similar markets, some have got different markets from each other, but they've all gone through the experiences of entering new markets and have so much to share with you today. So we're very excited to have them on our stage and sharing their insights with us. If you haven't done so already, do give a quick shout out in the chat, say hello, introduce yourself. We love to see you sort of involved in this conversation with us. And above the chat box, there is a Q&A section. So feel free to add any questions you have throughout today's session in this section. And at the end, for the last 10 minutes, we will be coming in and pulling some of the questions from the audience because we want to hear your inputs and your questions as well. And I'll be directing them over to our panel of wonderful speakers today. So that's enough of me blabbing away. Let's actually get started. So hello. Let's start off with introducing everybody. I'll just go very quickly first. So I am Megan. I am the director for the Startup Grind Osaka chapter. And with me today, I have 4 amazing startups. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Namun. Do you think you can give us a quick introduction?
Hi, everybody. I am Namun. I'm from Mongolia and working in Korea for What 3 Words to make What 3 Words a global addressing solution, even for Korea market. So you guys might not be aware of what 3 Words is. To give you a short introduction, What 3 Words is a global addressing system which divided the entire world into a 3 meter by 3 meter squares, and given each square unique combination of 3 words, and we call that as 3-word address. So yeah, as mentioned, it's a global addressing system, so market entry is a must for us. So excited to be here and talking about 3 words.
Wonderful, thank you. Dr. Hyung, you're the next on my screen. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you guys all online. My name is Singtel Hong. I'm a Milton J. Hendricks Chair and Professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm also director for Wisconsin Center for Nanobiosystems. I guess I can be one of the older ones in this group, but if not the oldest. But in the meantime, I co-founded a company, a small biotech startup called Capio Biosciences, first in the US. And then last year, we expanded our company to Korea. So we established Capio Korea last year, where we are trying to infiltrate the Korean market as well, while we are developing and manufacturing our prototype devices and doing some clinical studies in Korea. So my company is basically working on the development of liquid biopsy technology. We are really focusing on circulating tumor cells and tumor-derived exosomes to be developed as biomarkers that can be detected from simple blood draw. So basically, instead of getting the surgical operation for tissue biopsy or being imaged using PET-CT scans or MRI, which is painful, I don't know, I think you guys are too young to be imaged yet, but once you get to a certain age, you have to be imaged on a regular basis, and that's the really, not a good experience that I really hate. You have to go into this tiny tube that barely fits your body and stay still for like 40 minutes with incredibly annoying noise. So instead of getting those, if you can really diagnose and prognose the cancer, through the simple blood draw, I think that would be really helpful for the patients. So that's what we're trying to do. And then we are, at the early stage, and fairly small startup, but trying to develop the technology for both in the U.S. and then Korean market, and hopefully we can help some patients in the future. So nice to meet you all.
Wonderful, thank you. And next on my screen is Ian. Would you like to give an introduction?
Hi guys, Ian here. I'm from Singapore, but currently am in Korea, Seoul. So if anyone's in the region, be it Singapore or Korea, would love to meet up. I run a company, started a company in the travel and hospitality space, so called Travel. We do B2B SaaS solution for hotels mostly to automate their guest engagement from inquiries, reservations, self-check-in, concierge, calling for a ride hail within your geographic location, as well as all the way to checkout. And we do that all on chat. So you can WhatsApp, WeChat, Line, Facebook message the hotel directly using our solution. We've been around for a while now. So it started in 2016, growing aggressively into 2019. We were profitable in multiple countries. And then the COVID pandemic hit. So that was really, really drastic for us in terms of the impact to our clients. But post-pandemic, tourism is coming back. I'm here in Korea. Would love to meet anybody that's traveling as well. And I think it's looking up in terms of how technology has been shaped to cope with the post-pandemic tourism that's coming back. So happy to share a bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, wonderful. And last but definitely not least, Theo.
Thanks a lot, Megan, and great to be here. Nice to meet everyone. My name is Theodoric, but please you can call me Theo. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Intellect. Intellect, we are a mental health startup. We effectively want to change how mental health care is done for workforces, insurers, individuals across the APAC region. We are a Singapore-founded company, but we have quite large regional ambitions in Asia. So definitely very, very apt for us to join this session. With us, it's been quite an exciting journey. We've been around for a few short years, but really saw a huge shift in perspective for mental health over the past 2 years in the pandemic. We've scaled and grown quite a fair bit, and today we serve over 3 million lives on the platform. We are fortunate to have the backing of great investors the likes of Tiger Global, Y Combinator, Insignia, and more. So very happy to share our perspective on how we see market expansion in Asia. We definitely are really building, and as we speak, learning as we go through our journey as well. So yeah, happy to meet everyone. And I'm currently based in Singapore, so like Ian, a Singaporean, but still here home in Singapore. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So very excited to have you all with us today and really bringing a broad perspective from different startups, different industries, and then sort of an exploration within the different countries within Asia for market expansion. So from my understanding, you've all approached these different new markets in slightly different ways. And I think there is a lot that we can learn from that. So I was wondering, before you started your market expansions, how did you determine that you were ready to expand and which market you needed to expand to? I think I'll ask Dr. Hyun on this one first.
Yeah, sure. So, we started out of US, right? And then, well, I mean, we still, honestly, we're still focusing on the US market because for the most of the biotechs, like it's a large market, right? And then, but we are, developing the new technology. We are really research oriented. So, we are still under the developments. We established the company back in 2015, but, over the past 7 years, we are spending a lot of money for developing the new technology, and we are still testing it. So we recently finished. So reasons why we decided to expand to Korea was, Korea is obviously, if not emerged, the emerging market, and the cancer cases in Korea are growing fairly fast. And as the overall Korean population gets older, cancer becomes a lot more common, right? I mean, if once you hit 60, the chance that you get the cancer is going to be like about 2/3. So essentially, as long as you live long enough, you're going to get the cancer, right? You have a good chance to get the cancer. So I think there's a growing market, and then manufacturing is a lot more efficient here. So I can tell you one story that I experienced, which was we designed and kind of like made all the designs and engineering in the US for our prototype devices. And then for actual manufacturing, it was quoted like for multiple $1 million. And then I brought that design and all the plans to Korea, and we actually spent like 1/10 of that cost to make devices in Korea in a much faster way. So I think that's what sort of Asian power shows per se. But like our target is actually not only on the US and the Korean markets, but it develops some device that can help a lot of people. So we have this is technology based. So we have a good number of patents already that have been allowed in the US, and then China, in some of the countries, and Europe as well, in Japan. And then we are about to get allowed in Korea as well, based on my conversation with the patent examiner last week. So like our approach is a little bit different, right? Because it's coming out of the university, and then we've been spending a lot of resources and efforts to develop the new technology. And once we felt that this technology is actually sort of mature enough for the academic level to be potentially translated, so that's when we started the company, right? And then we continue to develop in a sort of marketing oriented way. So I learned it from my postdoc advisor. I'm kind of like selling, using his name too much, but so I did my postdoc at MIT with Bob Langer. So some of you might have heard of his name. So he's considered this god of professor entrepreneur. He studied like over 40 biotech startups so far, and then most recently he is a co-founder of Madonna. So he made the official list of billionaires last year, published by Forbes. So during my postdoc experience, I learned a lot, and then I realized that being in academia, that's awesome, doing a lot of cool things and some innovations and lab work. But I realized that unless you translate it, it becomes less of an impact, right? So we really wanted to translate and really bring our lab products to the market in the clinic, so that we can really maximize the impact of what we've been really trying hard over the years. So one more story is that I've been publishing quite a bit of papers so far, right? And then if you look at the citation records, my citation is actually decent. So I have a total citation of over 17,000 times. But if you divided it by individual papers, so if you would say that if your paper is cited like over 20 times in 2-3 years, I think it's going to be considered as a success in academia, right? But on the flip side, if you think about it, right, you spend a lot of money for that. You really pushed your students and postdocs, to work super hard, and yourself worked really hard as well. And at the end of the day, only 20 people in the world read it. So I thought that impact-wise, translation, it's not really compatible with just pure academic work. Not saying that academic work is not important. So my experience is more on the sort of academia to business, and by doing that, I feel really rewarded nowadays. So my goal is that we eventually hit the market, and then I see firsthand some direct benefit to the patients out of the lab products. So that's why we're expanding. So that was the short answer.
Absolutely. And I do agree with you. I think that's a very valid point, that you need to translate the academia to real world applications. I think that's an incredibly big takeaway there. Let me throw the question over to Theo. Why did you start your market expansion, and how did you determine that you were ready?
Yeah, so happy to share a bit about our journey as well. We started with from day one with quite regional plans, but naturally we had to face how we did our business. As a startup, you only have so much resources to do what you want to do. So we started where home is first, so that's Singapore, and Singapore is actually a place where I think it's an excellent place to build a company for a variety of reasons, but also the fact that it's a good test bed for proving a model and then scaling up from there as well. So for us, we actually saw really quite strong growth, and while going at it, we started building our capabilities to go beyond just Singapore, but covering the APAC region. And from there, we started seeing different stages of adoption of our solutions on a regional level. We saw certain countries being a lot strong in demand for mental health support, certain countries that are naturally lagging a little bit more in terms of their mental health literacy and the likes as well. So for us, we always believe that it needed to be more than just a local play, a regional play, because there's only so much you can do in one single country, unless you are Indonesia or you're Japan or you're US or China, where it's a large market. Coming from a small city-state Singapore, it's always to build the hub and the center of excellence and scale from there. So that's how we started and went about it. And then from there, the next pieces as well, it's really towards identifying key markets where we see strong potential to grow what we're doing as well, with quite a bit of validation from a top-down to a bottoms-up perspective as well. And then we went from there. So that's a very, very high-level view of how we actually looked at our expansion based on the problem, need, demand, and then us building the solution from there.
Absolutely. I see people in the chat also seconding what you've just said, so that's really good to hear. And how about you, Namun? Would you be able to share a little bit around how you determined you guys were ready to expand and which markets to go into?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So as introduced earlier, With Rewards is a global addressing solution company, so that's given that we need to operate globally and then be adapted globally. So in order for With Rewards to be effective, we need to be adapted and used in various different companies or businesses or by people. Anywhere address is used, With Rewards is working towards being an complementary addressing solution on top of a traditional address. So what that means is when entering a Korean market, obviously Korea is a very vibrant market, and then Korea has a lot of businesses who are more forward thinking. So I'm not sure if you guys heard, but fashion trend or brands usually enter a Korea market first to see how people would react. And so Korea has been an important market for us, as well as any other markets that use addressing. And one of the things Koreans very ace at is deliveries. So addressing is usually used in deliveries, food deliveries, or e-commerce deliveries, logistics. So that was one of the reasons why With Rewards was keen to adapt or be implemented in South Korea. As well as the adoption happened with the Kakao Map team back in 2019. So one of the biggest navigation mapping supplier in South Korea has started using With Rewards. So we have seen that, okay, Koreans are keen to adapt With Rewards to use With Rewards on a daily basis. So we're really excited about Korean market, and I'm talking about Korean market more specifically just because I look after a Korean market versus other markets. So please understand that. With Rewards sees other markets as important as Korea, as well as we work with other companies in Singapore, and we are invested in that region as well. So it really is all about, anywhere address is used, we want to be implemented and used by both people, general public, and as well as businesses. And then on top of that, what I like about With Rewards is we're also used in like the emergency services around the world, just to help, our technology is used for public goods. So if there is any emergency services needing to find incidents, they can use the Rewards address to find the exact location without losing any time. So it's really those use cases. It's the vibrant market in Korea, as well as anywhere address is used. With Rewards is expanding into markets generally.
Wonderful, absolutely. And I have seen quite a few examples of With Rewards being used, especially in the emergency services. I thought that was an excellent use case for it, and it's always really amazing to see what you guys can achieve with that. Ian, over to you. which markets did you think were the best for you to expand to, and how did you know that you were ready for those markets?
Right. I guess you never know that you're ready. But so I think we like similar to Theo, we started off with Singapore because that's just where I was born, raised, studied, and it's a really easy market to validate your product. But honestly, it wasn't the best place for us in terms of a solution and product focus. And why I say that is, I mean, Singapore itself is a huge tourism hub, right? And pre-pandemic wise, that really was our focus. But we do really feel that our solution can help bridge communication a lot better between, international inbound travelers. And why we say that is because the communication breakdown between a traveler and a staff generally happens over language barriers. So we did know that from the very beginning, as much as we started in Singapore, that we are targeting Asia, non-English speaking, developed markets because we are an enterprise solution and we sell better in terms of currency wise to developed markets. But more than that, we help them to cut manpower costs, which are expensive in those areas. And for us to kind of target gateway cities that have huge tourism numbers. So we were looking at Tokyo, we were looking at Osaka, we were looking at Seoul, obviously, but also in the region where we saw growing developing markets like Bangkok and KL and all this Southeast Asian markets as well. So I think when we kind of got into those markets, we started off with Singapore, we went second into Japan, and we were looking at Hong Kong at that time before the riot started. I think how we kind of decided to go into each market, I kind of generally size it down to three main areas for my team, even internally. I say either we go in through sales, that means we got a big enough client that justifies our expansion there, or an investor, because the network to get in, the people that open doors to, is really important. And I guess the last one is generally either government assisted programs or support from the government, both from Singapore side, outbound or inbound government kind of programs. So in that space, like with Japan for us, we actually found an investor. The investor brought us in. Very grateful that they kind of helped us to set up shop. Borrowed us their office space, which we still use. Help us with our hires. The translation materials and opening doors to sales. And I think with Japan, credibility is also quite a big factor. Sadly, with the pandemic and current situation, Japan has not opened up their borders. Decided to kind of expand into Korea late last year. And we got in through Techstars, and then we also got through the K Startup Grand Challenge, which helps us to land and get my alien registration card here. So it kind of makes it a lot easier administratively. But I think to kind of generically answer your question, I think it's really also just understanding the markets that you want to target and then finding either the investors, the sales, or the accelerators or programs that can help you to land.
That's absolutely brilliant advice and very clear. And I think possibly very similar to how a lot of other startups approach the different market entry strategies. And you've literally just taken all of them and tailored it to whichever market you're going for. That's awesome. You've also started to answer a little bit of my next question, so I'm going to hop right into that, which is, could you give us an example of what the most difficult step for you was in entering a new market, and how did you overcome that step? What sort of support? Where did you find that support? I'm going to shoot that right back to Ian, just to continue on the ball there.
Right. Yeah, I guess I already kind of covered that. You mentally prepped us for the questions and it's just at the back of my head, right? So I think for us, actually the most difficult step for us always getting the right people in the team to lead this efforts in this country. Language is obviously a huge barrier. I think I see that in one of the questions in the chat as well. But language is definitely a huge barrier. I speak conversationally in Japanese. I would say I'm good with the business Japanese, right? The Keigo. And I speak no Korean, right? I only know annyeonghaseyo when I landed here. So I think finding the right people, very fortunate for us, we deal with the travel and hospitality space. The people that we interface with, like the general managers of the hotels, generally tend to speak English. But yet like native language, people are still more comfortable with. They open up a bit faster, sales get done easier. Yeah, so I think that has usually been the bigger challenge for us to enter a new market. And I think that's why we kind of look at generally investors or accelerators or programs that can help us to land in those countries. What our Japanese investor did was they actually like kind of seconded one of their consultants to us even before we hired. And that was really, really helpful because spoke English, spoke Japanese, helped with all this, materials, translation, job posting, and I think that was kind of one of the best examples I could give to kind of enter the market. For Korea, it was a lot more difficult for us, but we did get an intern, and the intern kind of bridged that gap a little bit. But we were very fortunate to find experienced people that we eventually was able to bring on board our team. So.
Awesome, wonderful, and I do agree. The language is definitely a challenge that a lot of startups face, and we see that a lot as well when we talk a lot about the different events that we do through Startup Grind. Namun, how about you? Do you think you can give us some insights into what the most difficult step for you was?
With us, I think the biggest or hardest challenge per se is it's more about like changing behaviors of people, because we're so used to using our traditional addresses in our own country, and most of the time people don't get that we have problems with the addressing system that we have. So when you think about it, the address that we use nowadays, it's a little different story in Korea, but 100 years, 200 years, the addressing system has not changed. But within those years, we started using technology for navigation. So when we were entering those addresses into a technology, it's just not built for it. So it's a long addressing, there are similar sounding addressing, so it's a little different or difficult to operate with the voice entry system, or it's just hard to type it in. So those are the things that we just need to repeatedly talk about it with our partners or just general public about why Web3words is useful. So it's more of behavioral change. And on top of that, I think it's also about just the cultural differences too. So Web3words is a global addressing system, and it operates exactly the same in the different, all around the world. So it's the same system that should be applied in different markets. But at the same time, when doing businesses, it's more about like understanding those business setting cultures. So for example, when you're meeting with the business over Zoom. So due to COVID, I had to do more Zoom meetings. It's a little different settings than that. And then when you're meeting in person, you have to have a certain body language. You have to have a certain ways you exchange business cards. You have to have a certain ways you kind of have to read the room, because it's more hierarchical, and then also a more respectful settings than the US per se. So I think it's like a cultural settings that you have to adapt and that you have to understand. And I think it's also the language part. I do speak fluent Korean, but then I asked my father-in-law, who is Korean, just like, how do you say this in a business setting? Does this make sense? And I also asked my husband whether this email sounds right. So I think I tried my best to make sure that all these ways that I'm warming my sentences are not offensive. So I think it's just like understanding, and then just also talking about this new concept to people who don't believe that addressing is a problem in new markets. So I think it's just more of the behavioral change as well as understanding the culture.
Absolutely, that's a very good point. I think breaking habits, like on almost like a global or a cultural level, is often a very big challenging thing when you're entering new markets, because you basically have to show like, oh no, there is a problem here. You might not have noticed it yet, but here's how we can solve that.
Exactly. At the same time, I think people are comfortable just explaining the challenges, right? So for example, if I were to order food at Han River, it's fine that people go and they meet at this specific place to pick up the food. But then when you think about it, if you were to use the three-word address to help navigating the drivers to find you at the exact spot, then it just makes life much easier. But then people are just so comfortable, doing things the way they used to do. So it's just talking, having that conversation over and over again, and then making friends with your partners to make sure that they're ready to hear. I think those are the challenges for entering a new market for us.
Absolutely. Theo, how about you? What was the hardest challenge for you that you faced?
So echoing a lot of what Namun and Ian mentioned already, I think the first piece, and then I'll add a separate element that's more relevant towards the space we're in. So naturally entering a new market that is not English native speaking requires a good amount of building a local operations, or at least not so much so local operations, but someone that can run in local manner the work that we're doing there, basically. So those are huge for the non-English native speaking markets. For us, that's Japan, that's Korea, and even the Chinese speaking markets as well. So it's quite critical that we have people to work with, or as Ian mentioned, local investors on the ground that can help push an entry into the market that isn't entirely cold. So those are very, very, it's not the only way, but it is definitely massively helpful if we have local partners on the ground there. That's one thing. For us, what is quite difficult, given we're in the mental health space, in the healthcare space, there's much more different regulations around how health or care is dispensed by country, different licenses, different regulations. So something that we have to think quite a bit about. It's basically how do we ensure that we provide care that is not just effective, but also meeting the local standard needs as well. It could be as simple as just ticking a box that the country requires, but it's critical that we get it figured out before, or at least sufficiently well before entering the market, just to ensure that we can deliver on what those requirements are as well. So those are some of the nuances that we had to think quite a bit about when we go into the market. And then I think that the last key thing is really getting things going. Recently, I was just, I think I shared with you, Megan, a while back. I was just down in Tokyo with our Japan team as we're launching there as well. So really interesting, because it pretty much is building a whole new startup from scratch again in some strange sense. So it is fun, but also the early parts where you're trying to replicate hopefully the success you've seen in another market they're in the same market, but you can't just copy paste what you've done there. There always has to be some nuance in what you're doing for that market itself. So yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. As you started hinting at my next question already, but before we hop to that one, I want to ask Dr. Hong, what was your hardest step when expanding your business into South Korea?
Yeah, I will make it short. Well, language barrier was big, but luckily I can speak Korean really fluently. So, as you may be able to tell, so for me personally, I didn't have that barrier. But being a person who's working with the people based in the U.S. Versus people based in Korea, there was always communication issue. So I really. I worked as a translator at many meetings and stuff. But surprisingly, I think a language barrier, especially at least in the Korean market, I think is fairly low, because a lot of young people in Korea speak really good English. And in fact, I also I have a joint appointment with one of the universities in Korea called Yonsei University, and I teach the students there. And a lot of them speak perfect English. So I think a lot of young generation Korean folks do speak really good English. So language barrier is getting lower and lower. I think what is important is who you work with, right? After all, everything is going to be operated by human, right? So if you make a good team who has a little bit of more sort of international mindset, and open-minded, I think it's going to be easier to work with. So, and the other even bigger challenge for me personally was different business atmosphere in Korea. So, in the US, So there are so many companies founded by professors. So and if the professor founded companies are a little different, right? So usually the founder who happens to be a professor at one of the universities in the U.S. Usually founds a company, and then their like involvement in day-to-day operation is going to be fairly minimal. Otherwise, Bob Langer wouldn't have started 40 different companies, right, and being successful. But in Korea, I think that they really want those founders who are often professors to be involved in the company in a daily basis. So they want the professors to be the CEO that I'm actually serving as a CEO for Capio Korea because of that reason, and then being involved in daily operations and being involved in all those fundraising and stuff. That's important, I think. And from the investor standpoint, I really understand what they are looking for, because they really want their money to be used by the I don't know, professionals and stuff who knows what they are doing, obviously. But on the flip side, right, I think that as a professor, I think my talents or my capability is more on the research and finding of new things rather than really focusing on the translational activities per se. So I'm kind of trying to change it. It's hard, but I'm involved in the daily operation in Capio Korea quite a bit, but and the fundraising obviously. But eventually, I think that's a better model, that like scientists working on what they are doing really well, and they continue to innovate. And then, when they find some products that have potential marketability, and those are professional, business runners, like professional CEOs and executives can kick in and then take it over. So I think that would be a better model, but, I don't think Korea has that kind of sort of mindset for a lot of tech heavy startups. So that has been a big hurdle for me.
Absolutely. And I do agree from my personal experience. I've noticed in Korea there is quite a heavy leaning on the academic side, and how much you guys take part in sort of the startup ecosystem. And I just thought that was really interesting. I mean, very unique.
To tell you the truth, as a professor, I suck at managing people. So
shouldn't admit that out loud.
I'm okay. Don't take it too seriously.
Thank you. So also, from my background, I've worked with a lot of different startups to sort of help them navigate new market entry, and we talk a lot about sort of this product market fit and capability mapping in these sort of situations, these programs a lot. Do you think you could share a little bit about your learnings when you've adjusted your product market fit for a new market, and sort of, how did you recognize what needed to be changed, and how did you change it? I think this time we'll start with Theo first.
Sure. So I think for us, it's definitely critical that we get the local market nuance right when we expand into a new region, especially for, software, not just broadly categorize it, but software, it's a lot more a functional piece there where you design something like a sales CRM or the like. It should work for the most part for most different countries. But in the space you're in mental health care, given how personal it is, we have to take into account not just the regulations you mentioned, but how care is delivered and what kind of care is given according to the region's needs. So to give a very, very simple example that we reference in our space, in the US, how mental health care is perceived is a lot more mature in terms of the awareness there. I'm not saying there isn't stigma, but it's definitely much less. The problem to be solved in the US that we've seen is how do we bridge supply, right? How do we get care to people who already know they want care? Whereas in Asia, it's how do we get people knowing they want care? Given that we know one of the fundamental things is that a lot of people in Asia struggle with varying levels of smaller needs to larger needs, but they just don't know how to get started with the care due to the stigma, due to the cost, and just simply never having come across something like mental health support prior. So for us, that is quite critical that we get the care delivered right in the nuance that we have. So in the different markets, there are very different cultures. For us, again, just in more of a regional perspective, what triggers someone in terms of inciting stress or anxiety in, for example, Singapore or Hong Kong, where it's a fast-paced cities with a lot of work and things happening, as compared to rural Thailand, for example, will be quite different. So we have to ensure that the programs we create, the product we develop, it's not just translated, but very much localized for the nuance of the region we're expanding into as well. So I believe fundamentally that will apply to many different industries and different startups as well. What you build, even if it's a software, how you deliver, how you distribute it will be quite different based on the space you're in, like the partners you work with, and like, to give one final example, for example, in Japan, it's a huge like recruitment staffing conglomerate type company with Recruit, of course, on the likes there. We don't as much see this in other countries, or at least not at that size and scale. So it's quite different how we go to market in different regions as well, based on the dynamics there.
Absolutely. And I think you really hit the nail on the head there with some of the the situations in the different countries here. Maybe I can pass the ball over to Ian. How about you? How did you adapt your product market fit when entering into new markets here?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think unlike the mental health space that you were sharing, the regulations are slightly I wouldn't say it's less strict, but because we serve generally the international inbound travelers into each and every country. We do realize that there are some level of like immigration, nuances, like, what does the hotel need to collect, what do they need to keep, how do they need to keep the information, but also that international inbounds, like data protection policies, right? Like GDPR in Singapore, it's PDPA. Every country has their own little different data protection, so we just try to use the most strict one, right? That's the easiest for us. Just use the strictest data privacy standards, and then we apply it to all travelers. So I think in that sense, like, we kind of make it relatively generic. In terms of localization of our platform, it makes it a bit I wouldn't say it's much easier, but the fact that tourism and hospitality across the different countries are still generically quite similar. I mean, most of the tourism and hospitality students do, go to Switzerland or the better tourism schools to do, and then they go back to their home countries to join the hospitality space. I think one of the bigger challenge for us is really the integrations with local software providers that we have to interface with. For our solution, we need to interface with like property, with digital payment platforms, with digital locks and AWS. So I think in that same perspective, every time we go into a new market, we need to go and look at who is the incumbents, who are the strongest in this space, and then to kind of reach out to them. So the BD partnership aspect of it is relatively important for us. Yeah, so I think that in itself, on a software front, it's quite a big thing for us, because we do have to work with other partners in the space.
Absolutely. That's very insightful, and I do completely agree with you, especially for in the travel industry. Like I said, it's very different from the mental health side, but there are still a lot of like privacy regulations that you really do need to take into consideration there. Dr. Hyun, how about you? Was there any challenges with your product market fit, and how did you adapt it?
Well, first of all, we don't have any product yet, but there's an obvious clinical need, clinically unmet need, and then there's a need of developing a new biomarker. So I think situations in the U.S. and Korea are not that different. So if you go through a lot of collaboration with the physicians, and we're going through like IRB, I don't know if you're familiar with it, and you have to be, you have to have some protocols approved. And then Korean system is very similar to the US system. So we are doing that. We are already collaborating with 5 different hospitals in the US. And then we just established 2 partnerships in Korean hospitals, and developing 3 additional partnerships right now. So, and then, could be a lucky case for us, but there's no clear winner in our market. So hopefully we could move forward in a speedy way, and then preoccupy a little bit of pie. So long story short, I think my company does not really have products yet, but we are kind of trying to address clear unmet need in the clinic. So that I just finished with that.
Absolutely. I mean, the biosciences space and the health tech space, you did highlight it there in what you said. Like one of the most critical steps is building the partnerships in the different markets, and that's how you almost localize for that. Even though we're all human and we all mostly function in the same sort of way biologically, you still need to sort of navigate the hospital side and the clinic side, like you mentioned. And I think you're approaching that in a very good way by doing it through the partnerships.
Yeah, it's for sure. Thanks for the good summary.
No worries. And Naman, how about you? Could you give me a little bit of insight on your product market fit journey for South Korea?
Of course. So our goal is really making the three words enabled for everyone to be able to use. And by that, what that means is we have our three-word address in 51 languages. So along the way, when we launch our product, we usually see what that market, or for example, in Korea, Koreans use Korean mainly. So we made sure that we had a Korean three-word addresses enabled in our product. For Koreans to use the three-word address in Korean, in Korea, or anywhere around the world. So we make sure that for example, in India, there are obviously so many different languages, official languages in India. So we made sure that looking at percentage of each language used, we made sure that we included those language in our product so that Indians can use the three-word address in their own language. So those are the things that we made adjustments to our product. But in terms of how it works, it functions exactly the same. Basically, what we're doing is we're taking the GPS coordinates and then changing into a three-word address in 51 languages. So that functions the same. But I think that would be the main thing that we do, or we do for every market that we are expanding our business to.
Absolutely. And localization is always a very key step when it comes to identifying your product market fit. All right, I'm going to give you a bit of a challenge one now. So in one sentence, what would be your must-do item, your must-do advice to startups that are looking to enter new markets in Asia? Just one sentence. Ian, do you think you could go first?
Wow, you threw the most difficult question to me. One sentence to advise, right? Getting into new markets. I genuinely believe, I think it's the right people with the right market research, and I think at the end of the day, it's knowing your main objective of getting into the market. Yeah, so I personally believe that if you understand your business, you know where you're headed, and you know what kind of markets you want to conquer, then you would kind of double down, buckle up, and make sure that you get there. I think that's the startup way of life, right? Hustle, 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 and no matter what's the obstacle. So I think I exceeded a sentence, but just
You did. Thank you. How about you, Namun? One sentence of advice the startups must do.
I think it's similar to Ian. I think understanding the market, and I think understanding who is going to be using your product and what they're what they think is most important is really important for the startups to understand when launching a business in a different market. So really just understanding and also making sure that you understand their culture.
Absolutely. Dr. Han, how about you? One sentence advice.
Yeah, I'll go really generic. So I think it's important that you have to stay confident, believe in yourself, and work with good people who are enthusiastic about what they're doing.
Oh, that's very good advice. Very, very good advice. And Theo, how about you? What would be your one sentence must-do advice?
Yeah, so I think what I would give is not so much only just for expansion, but I think what applies to any startup is to ensure there's a very clear problem that you're solving in the market you're going into as well. Just ensure that you validate and come in with the problem to be solved and then come with the solution after, and not the reverse order. Because oftentimes I think what myself having worked in a venture build before, it's easy to get excited by the prospects of a market, by the prospects of a more revenue and more customers, but we have to assess if this is something that actually the market requires, and to invest resources thereafter. So start at the why, start the problem, and then go from there, basically.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we're going to open up to audience Q&A now. So if you do have some questions for our speakers today, do type it over into the Q&A section. And I'll be picking some of them out to read out to and have our wonderful speakers today to answer. So I'm going to start with the very obvious one, which multiple people have actually asked us, is how have you coped with different languages? Like, how are you managing different languages when you're entering into multiple markets? Theo, I think you've been doing this quite a lot recently. Could you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, I think no rocket science. You got to learn all the languages yourself. No, I'm kidding. you got to. I think you got to have, if not full-time employees, partners, interns, and be scrappy resource. As a startup, you really don't have much resource to go and build the whole thing ever, and you really shouldn't as well until you validate it. Work with contractors, work with partners, people that you can support. Interns really are a great way to get into the early parts of a new market when you need operational support, and they take the playbook from the Center of Excellence, which is your HQ or wherever that is as well. So that's for a startup, at least what I think is a easy way to do it. For us, it's a bit different because we do have to partner with local professionals for the space that we're in. So we partner, we find local mental health experts or operational folks if we are setting operations there, and then do it from there. But for a startup, if it's not a very, very specialized niche, I think starting with local junior staff or interns would be a great starting point to actually expand from there. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And Naman, you spoke a lot about the language elements as well. Would you be able to give some insights there too?
I think it's about the same. So we have fluent each market that we mainly focus on at What3 Words. So for me, obviously I am looking after Korea, and I'm based in Korea. So I do understand the culture. I do use the language on a daily basis when I'm talking about the business. So I think it's just very important to have a person in the team who just speaks and then understand the culture when speaking to these companies to become a partner. So we just have team members who are focused on different markets in the What3 Words.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm actually going to pivot onto a next question, which I think would be also like a great to hear a bit more of the different opinions and stuff. But we have a question that's sort of asking, what if me or my company is not ready to expand, or we don't feel like we're ready to expand? What can I do to know or to get to the level where I would be ready to expand? And I want to pass this over to Dr. Hong, because I think you've got some really good background insights on this.
That's a hard question. So I think it's case by case. So it had to really, use your best judgment to decide. In our case, I think it was, was money driven. So they got the investment in the US, and there were a couple investors in Korea who wanted to invest, but they, also wanted to have an entity in Korea. And at the same time, like last year, like VC market and the stock market were like really good, right? So expecting to get additional investment, especially for like biotech startup that does not have any revenue yet, but heavily relying on the investment. We thought that the Korean market is gonna have a great opportunity to get the more investment. Unfortunately, then right now the VC in Korea, especially for biosciences, has been frozen. So it's not really a good environment right now. But still, I mean, there are funding available. And then if you prove yourself and your company has a really potentially helpful technology in the clinic, for example, I think there's still a great chance to be funded. So, well, yeah, so I'll probably just stop there. I don't think it's going to be applying to everybody. So
It's a good, valid reason, though, to go after some of the monetary backgrounds, especially if you're a company that needs to rely onto those spaces. And maybe perhaps Ian can share a little bit on the opposite situation. How did you mentioned also earlier, how do you know when you're ready? What do you think some teams can do to know that they're ready to expand?
Right. I think all of you should heed Theo's advice. Know why you are expanding. I think if you're not ready, then don't. It's not easy, right? I mean, entering just the market that you're in is already difficult. Entering a new market is definitely not something. It's highly challenging. I personally enjoy it. Like, I enjoy that challenge. I think every one of us has a different perspective. And like some people love sales, some people love. Unfortunately, I've been thrown into a space where I'm the CEO, so I have to do everything. But if I do join a medium-sized company that is established, there's 100, 200 people, I would love to be in the BD expansion side of things. So that's my personal interest. But I think if you're not ready to enter, if you don't know the why that Theo mentioned, then sometimes, I mean, it's better to just double down, and focus on the markets that you are excelling in and you're doing well in, or you're just trying to find your product market fit in your first market that you're in. For us, Travel, we are in the midst of fundraising for our Series A, mainly because we feel that this is the time to double down, to grow, to expand into more markets, because this is where post-pandemic tourism is reviving. Our product is more ready and our product is more relevant than pre-pandemic even. So yeah, I think fundraising, like Dr. Hong was sharing, that could be one of the best ways for you to, I guess, feel a bit more ready, because you have the right connections, you have the resources to expand.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I'm afraid we have run out of time, so I'm going to have to close our audience Q&A there as well. But I would love to ask the speakers to maybe just drop your LinkedIn or your email address in the chat, as I am sure there are some people in the audience that are dying to ask you some more questions. I've seen a lot of questions about how to enter Japan. So, we have 3 startups here that have entered Japan already, so I'm pretty sure that they'll have some great advice for you as well. But I think we're going to wrap up today's session here. A big thank you, and please say thank you in the chat as well, to everybody that has joined us on stage for this session, and for all your patience with me sending you thousands of emails to sort out this panel discussion. So I'm very grateful for you for joining us. And a big thank you to everybody in the audience for joining us today, for asking your questions, and for being an incredibly active audience on the chat. I'm really happy to see that. And I hope that you all have a very good evening, and do make sure you reach out if you have any further questions.
Thanks a lot, Megan. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.